that they're going to be in quicker than we maybe expected. It was kind of uncertain what that timeline was going to look like. And, barring something unforeseen from Texas and Oklahoma, which they're certainly capable of, as we have seen, they are going to be, around for a couple more years. And, it's interesting. A lot of people thought that they would be setting up for their first year in the SEC right now, if you'll remember back at that. Oh, no way they last more than a year in the Big 12. Big 12 won't let them, and they won't want to be there. They'll just pay their way out. Well, there is no sign that they're on their way out right now, unless, again, they're scheming behind the scenes, which could very well be possible. But outside of that, yeah, we're going to see the Big 12 at 14 teams for a couple of years. I think that'll be fun. My only question is, I don't get real deep into the idea of like the conference schedule. Like, it's not just like, that's not one of the more fascinating things to me, but I know that's something that a lot of people do get excited about. And that's why there's been a lot of talk about how the schedule will be set up and why there is so much talk about divisions and all that. But I do think it's an interesting question of, if you got Texas and Oklahoma for 2 more years, do you want them playing the new brands, or do you want to make sure they're playing all the old brands? I mean, in theory, you could do all of it. You could have them play 2 new ones in the first year and 2 new ones in the second year. But I am curious to see kind of how they do that, and whether or not, would you rather, for example, them play Tech twice and Baylor twice and Oklahoma twice or not Oklahoma, but Oklahoma State twice in their final 2 years, or they only play one of those teams one time because they got to play UCF or BYU one time? Do y'all see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's the part that's interesting to me, because I would prefer they play the old brands because that's who's been around. But I also know the appeal of seeing Texas and BYU and getting big TV, figures while you can, and inking everything.
I don't know if Texas wants to see BYU.
Well, I could have made that joke too.
Yeah.
But yeah, Taysom Hill,
times 2, yeah.
Yeah, like that's what I am curious about as far as the schedule goes. As far as the pods and divisions and all that, I mean, I'm just gonna wait and see kind of how that goes. But how do they want to schedule Texas and Oklahoma in those final couple of years? What do y'all think? What would y'all rather see? Would you want to make sure it's important they play all the old Big 12 teams up to twice a piece? But then again, there's going to be extra teams, so you can't play everybody in 1 year. So somebody's not going to play them twice.
I'd rather see.
I haven't even thought about it.
I haven't thought about it.
Y'all see what I'm coming from?
Yeah,
though?
I don't think, seeing as that they're unceremoniously leaving, that it's all that important to me personally. I would rather see them gouge, them for like, hey, guess what? You're leaving this league. We're going to make you play.
You're going to Orlando.
You're going to Orlando. You're going to Provo. I mean, that's what I'd like to see.
Squeeze the money out of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Well, they're going to play the equal amount. It depends on how many games. If it's 9, 8, whatever it is, they're going to play equal amount of home and away. But, yeah, I haven't thought much about that.
Yeah, and does your 23 opponent mean you're getting a return trip? So everybody that you play in 23 means you play them in 24 in the opposite location. So then that means that there's at least 4 teams you're not going to see in those final 2 years. Now, could that be those new 4 schools? Sure. Will the new 4? Well, I guess they don't really have much of a say early on, but I am curious about that aspect
when
of
you
it.
play in Alabama, and you have played who you've played, including the 19 game against eventual unbelievable team in LSU, among others, Texas is not dodging anybody. We could always talk about whatever bowl game matchups it could have been the last 10 years with A&M one way or the other. Who knows? But I don't think they'd want to play Houston. Not because they're afraid of Houston. I don't think they want to play Houston because that gives Houston a chance, even though it's Texas. I think that would be bigger for Houston to win that game, and I think they would rather not that game be scheduled.
So schedule it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Just screw what they think. Like, they're the ones leaving.
No,
they don't have any say.
from the UT perspective.
No, I know.
Yeah.
So, let's schedule Houston then and put it in Houston. That's what I would. Now that you said that, that's one game I want to see them go down to Houston and play the Cougars.
I can tell you the saddest I've ever been as a Florida State fan is not the last couple years. It was when I knew Bobby Bowden was about to get fired because they played USF at home in Tallahassee at the Doak. And before the game, they interviewed Jim Leavitt, who's the head coach at South Florida at the time. And he said, this is the biggest game in the history of our school. And I thought, this is like the 9 millionth biggest game in the history of the players on the team's lives. that can associate with Florida State. So they
So
had,
what? But then he's right,
but they had something to play for.
Yeah.
And so with Houston beating Texas on their way out the Big 12 door, they take their place. That's a huge
That's what I'm
game
saying.
for Houston. Yeah.
That doesn't mean Texas wouldn't rip them.
Yeah,
drill
they
'em.
could
No.
easily beat them,
Yeah.
but and then have bragging rights on their way out. I think the thing that you're hoping for is if you're the new Big 12, you just don't want to see either one of them win a conference title on their way out. Now, you can't schedule it to prevent that from happening, but yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing them send Texas down to Houston to play the Cougars one of those final couple of years. But that's why I brought it up, is because I was transcribing that last night and I was like, they're not going to be able to play everybody unless they find a way to play everybody. And the only way to do that is you can't possibly play a home and home with everybody within 2 years. So somebody's getting left out one way or the other. So you try to have them face everybody at least once, and then maybe put the focus on the rematches with Baylor and Tech and Oklahoma State, and make sure those games are played. How do you do that? That's just one of the thoughts that I had last night.
From Chris, Texas and Oklahoma are in